What happens when power becomes a twisted game? When humanity itself becomes the ultimate prize, in a contest where no one truly wins? In the darkest corners of American history, there are stories that challenge everything we think we know about human nature, control, and survival. This is one of those stories, raw, uncomfortable, and impossible to forget. Before we begin this haunting tale, if you appreciate deep historical narratives that don't shy away from the uncomfortable truths of our past, please subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell. These stories need to be told, remembered, and never repeated. Now, let me take you back to 1857, to a plantation in Louisiana where Spanish moss hangs like funeral shrouds, and where one woman turned suffering into her personal theater. The Beaumont plantation stretched across 3,000 acres of Louisiana soil, a kingdom of cotton and cruelty where the Mississippi River curved like a dark serpent through the land. The main house, a Greek revival mansion with towering white columns, stood as a monument to wealth built on broken backs and stolen lives. Madame Celeste Beaumont sat on the veranda in her customary black silk dress, a widow's uniform she wore not out of mourning, but as a statement of power. Her husband, Jacques Beaumont, had been dead for 3 years, trampled by his own horse after a night of drinking. The parish whispered that Celeste had spooked the animal deliberately, though no proof was ever found. At 34, Celeste was striking rather than beautiful. Her features were sharp, angular, carved from marble rather than flesh. Ice-blue eyes surveyed her domain with the calculating precision of a chess master arranging pieces on a board. Her blonde hair, always pulled back in a severe bun, gleamed in the afternoon light filtering through the ancient oaks. Before her, 7 men stood in a silent line. They were her slaves, property in the eyes of the law, human beings in the eyes of God, and pawns in her twisted game. Each man bore the marks of plantation life, scarred backs, calloused hands, eyes that had learned to look at the ground rather than meet a white person's gaze. But today she demanded they look at her. "Gentlemen," she said, the word dripping with irony, "I have an announcement." The eldest, a man named Solomon who had seen 40 hard years, kept his expression carefully neutral. Beside him stood his son, Marcus, barely 21, with the build of someone who had worked the fields since childhood. There was Thomas, the blacksmith whose massive arms could bend iron. Daniel, quick and intelligent, who had taught himself to read by studying discarded newspapers. Benjamin, silent and brooding. Isaac, whose wit had earned him lashes more times than anyone could count. And finally young Samuel, just 18, still naive enough to hope. "My late husband," Celeste continued, rising from her chair and descending the veranda steps with deliberate grace, "believed in discipline through fear. The whip, the chain, the deprivation of food." She walked along the line of men, her dress rustling against the wooden planks. "But I have found something far more effective." She stopped in front of Marcus, studying him as one might examine livestock. He kept his eyes fixed on the oak tree behind her, jaw clenched. "Motivation," she whispered. "Every man wants something. The question is, what are you willing to do to get it?" The air hung heavy with humidity and dread. Spanish moss swayed in the breeze like ghostly witnesses to whatever was about to unfold. "Every month," Celeste announced, returning to her position at the center of the veranda, "there will be a competition. The nature of the contest will vary. Sometimes it will test your strength, sometimes your speed, sometimes your creativity. The winner receives a prize unlike any other on this plantation." She smiled, and the expression contained no warmth. "A night with me, in my chambers, away from the slave quarters, from the endless labor, from the reality of your existence. For one night, you will dine at my table, sleep in a feather bed, and be treated as something more than what you are." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the cicadas seemed to pause their eternal song. Solomon's hands, hanging at his sides, slowly curled into fists. Marcus's breath caught in his throat. Thomas stared at the ground, his jaw working. Daniel's mind raced, trying to understand the trap he knew must be hidden in this offer. Benjamin's eyes finally rose to meet Celeste's, and what she saw there pleased her. Isaac and Samuel simply looked confused, unable to process what they had just heard. "You're wondering if I'm serious," Celeste said, reading their faces with practiced ease. "I assure you I am. You're wondering what the catch is. There is none. Beyond the obvious fact that you must win against your brothers, your friends, your family." She gestured toward the line of men. "The first competition will be held next Saturday. A race, from the northern boundary of the plantation to the oak tree behind me. Approximately 4 miles through field and forest. The first man to touch this tree wins." Celeste descended the steps once more, approaching Solomon. She reached out and traced a finger along his cheek. He flinched but didn't pull away. "Questions?" she asked softly. Solomon's voice, when he finally spoke, was rough with barely contained emotion. "Why? Why?" Celeste laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Because I can. Because I'm bored. Because watching grown men destroy themselves over crumbs of affection is infinitely more entertaining than any theater performance in New Orleans." "Choose whichever reason appeals to you, Solomon." She returned to her chair, settling into it like a queen on a throne. "You have until Saturday to prepare. Train if you wish. Form alliances if you think it will help. Pray to whatever God you believe is listening." Her smile widened. "It won't matter. Only one of you can win." She waved her hand dismissively. "You're dismissed. Except you. Benjamin, stay." The 6 men filed away, their minds reeling, their hearts heavy with a new weight they couldn't yet name. Only Benjamin remained, standing alone before the widow's cold gaze. "You looked at me," Celeste observed. "The others were too afraid or too proud, but you looked directly at me. Why?" Benjamin met her eyes again, and this time there was something defiant in his expression. "Because I wanted to see if you had a soul, ma'am." The slap came fast, her palm connecting with his cheek with a crack that echoed across the grounds. Benjamin's head snapped to the side, but he didn't raise his hand to his face, didn't cry out. He simply turned back to face her, a red mark blooming on his dark skin. Celeste's breathing had quickened. "Get out," she hissed. Benjamin nodded once and turned to leave. "Benjamin," she called when he reached the bottom step. He paused but didn't turn around. "You just became my favorite to win." That night, in the slave quarters, a row of cramped cabins that housed 30 people in conditions fit for animals, the 7 men gathered in Solomon's dwelling. A single candle provided light, casting long shadows on the rough wooden walls. "She's trying to break us," Solomon said, his voice low but firm. He sat on the edge of his narrow bed, his wife Esther standing behind him with her hand on his shoulder. "Pitting us against each other is just another way to control us." Marcus leaned against the wall, his young face troubled. "But what if it's real? Papa, what if the winner really does get a night away from all this? When was the last time any of us slept in a real bed, ate real food?" "At what cost?" Thomas's deep voice rumbled from the corner. The blacksmith's massive frame barely fit in the small space. "Your dignity? Your brotherhood with the men standing in this room?" "Dignity?" Isaac laughed bitterly. "What dignity do we have? We're property. We're less than the horses in her stable. At least they get oats and grooming." Daniel, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. His intelligence had always set him apart, made him dangerous in the eyes of overseers who feared educated slaves. "It's not about dignity or comfort. It's about division. Right now, in this moment, we're together. We support each other. We're family. But from now until Saturday, we'll be competitors. After Saturday, we'll be enemies. The winner will have something the rest of us don't. The losers will resent him for it. That's what she wants." "So, what do we do?" young Samuel asked, his voice cracking slightly. He was the newest arrival to Beaumont Plantation, sold south from Virginia just 6 months ago. "Do we refuse to participate?" Solomon shook his head slowly. "We can't refuse. She didn't phrase it as a choice. It's a command dressed up as an opportunity. If we don't run on Saturday, we'll face the whip, or worse." Benjamin, who had been silent since entering, finally spoke. He sat on the floor in the corner, his fingers absently touching the spot where Celeste had struck him. "She wants to see what we'll do to each other when given a reason. She wants to watch us become monsters to each other. So I say we don't give her that satisfaction." All eyes turned to him. "What do you mean?" Marcus asked. "I mean we run the race. We compete. But we don't let it destroy us. Whoever wins, we celebrate together. We don't let resentment take root. We remember who the real enemy is. That's easy to say now, Thomas observed, but when you're lying in a featherbed eating roast chicken while the rest of us are sharing moldy cornbread on flea-ridden pallets, will you still feel that way? Benjamin met the blacksmith's gaze steadily. I don't know, I hope so. But if I don't, I'm asking you all now, while I still have sense, to remind me of who I am. Remind me that a night of comfort isn't worth losing my soul. The candle flickered, and for a moment, the men's faces were illuminated in stark relief. Fear, hope, anger, resignation, all written in the lines and shadows. My son, Solomon said quietly, looking at Marcus, promise me something. Whatever happens Saturday, promise me you'll remember that you're more than this, more than property, more than a prize to be won or a competitor to be defeated. You're a human being with worth that no white woman's games can diminish. Marcus nodded, though his eyes were bright with unshed tears. I promise, Papa. But even as the words left his lips, they all knew that promises made in darkness often broke in the harsh light of day. The week that followed was unlike any other on Beaumont plantation. The regular work continued. Cotton needed picking, fields needed tending, livestock needed care. But beneath the surface something had shifted. Celeste watched from her veranda each day, taking her afternoon tea while observing the 7 men, with the keen interest of a scientist studying specimens. She noted when Marcus began running extra laps around the property after his work was done. She smiled when she saw Thomas in the smithy, strengthening his legs by working in a deep squat. She was delighted when Isaac started timing different routes through the woods, looking for shortcuts. But it was Benjamin who fascinated her most. He didn't train, he didn't prepare. He simply worked his regular tasks with the same steady determination he always had, as if the race didn't exist. On Wednesday, she summoned him to the main house. He found her in the library, a room filled with leather-bound volumes that represented more knowledge than any slave would ever be allowed to access. She stood by the window, backlit by the afternoon sun, her silhouette sharp and commanding. "You're not training," she observed without preamble. "No, ma'am." "Why not?" Benjamin considered his answer carefully. Speaking to Celeste Beaumont was like walking through a field of hidden traps. One wrong word could mean a whipping, or worse. "Because the race isn't what matters," he said finally. Her eyebrows rose with interest. "Oh? Then what does matter?" "Staying human." Celeste turned from the window, her ice-blue eyes studying him with renewed intensity. "Elaborate." "You want us to tear each other apart for scraps of luxury," Benjamin said, his voice steady despite the risk he was taking. "You want to see how low we'll sink, what we'll sacrifice of ourselves for one night of pretending to be something we're not. But if I train myself to win at all costs, if I let the competition consume me, then I've already lost the only thing you can't take from me." "And what's that?" "My choice in how I respond." For a long moment, Celeste simply stared at him. Then she laughed. Not the brittle, cruel laugh she usually employed, but something that almost sounded genuine. "You're either very wise or very stupid, Benjamin. I haven't decided which." She crossed the room, moving closer to him than propriety would normally allow. He could smell her perfume, something floral and expensive. "Let me tell you something," she said softly. "I had a sister once, Emily. She was everything I wasn't, kind, gentle, beloved by everyone. When she was 19, she fell in love with one of my father's slaves, a stable hand named James. He could read just like you. He was intelligent, principled, thought he was better than his circumstances." Celeste's voice took on a hard edge. "My father discovered them together. James was sold south and worked to death in a sugar mill within a year. Emily hung herself from the oak tree you'll be racing to on Saturday. She was 20 years old." Benjamin remained silent, unsure where this confession was leading. "Do you know what I learned from that?" Celeste continued. "Love doesn't transcend circumstance. Principles don't put food in your belly. Intelligence doesn't save you from the whip. The only thing that matters in this world is power, who has it and who doesn't. Everything else is just pretty lies we tell ourselves to make the truth bearable." She reached out and touched his chest, right over his heart. You think staying human is a victory. But humanity is a luxury, Benjamin, one you can't afford. By Saturday, you'll understand that. You'll run, you'll compete, you'll fight with everything you have, because no matter how much you want to believe otherwise, you want what I'm offering. You want it more than your next breath. She withdrew her hand and returned to the window. You're dismissed. Benjamin left the library with his mind churning. As he walked back toward the slave quarters, he passed Marcus, who was breathing hard from another training run. They made eye contact, and for the first time since the competition was announced, there was something wary in Marcus's gaze, something that made Benjamin's stomach turn. It was beginning. Saturday arrived with unusual weather. Dark clouds gathered on the horizon, promising a storm, but the rain held off. The air was thick with moisture and tension. By noon, word had spread throughout the plantation. Even slaves from the fields were allowed to gather near the oak tree to watch. Celeste had positioned herself on the veranda again, this time with several other plantation owners and their wives in attendance. She had made the competition a social event, inviting her peers to witness her experiment in human nature, as she called it. The 7 men lined up at the northern boundary, marked by an old stone wall. Each wore only pants, their torsos bare, their feet unshod. Their different approaches to preparation were evident in their bodies. Marcus looked lean and ready. Thomas's powerful frame seemed coiled with potential energy. Isaac's eyes darted around, already planning his route. Daniel stretched methodically. Samuel shifted nervously. Solomon stood still, resigned to whatever would come, and Benjamin, standing at the end of the line, simply waited. Celeste's overseer, a cruel man named Garrett with a face like a bulldog, held a pistol in the air. "On my shot," he called out, his voice carrying across the assembled crowd. "First man to touch the oak tree behind the main house wins." The 7 men crouched into starting positions. In the crowd, their families watched with a mixture of pride and horror. Esther gripped her hands together so tightly her knuckles had gone pale. Other wives, mothers, and children stood witness to what was about to unfold. The pistol fired. They exploded forward, 7 men running like their lives depended on it, because in a way, they did. This wasn't about glory or prizes. It was about surviving the games of people who had power over every aspect of their existence. Marcus took an early lead, his youth and training evident in his form. He had mapped out the straightest route and stuck to it, his legs pumping with mechanical efficiency. Behind him, Isaac veered left, taking a path through the woods that he had scouted earlier in the week. Thomas ran with surprising speed for his size, his powerful legs eating up ground. Daniel kept a steady pace, neither leading nor falling behind, conserving his energy for when it would matter most. Solomon ran with the grim determination of a man doing what he must, not what he wants. Samuel ran with desperate hope, still believing that winning might actually change something. Benjamin ran last, his pace almost leisurely compared to the others. He wasn't trying to win. He was trying to remember why he shouldn't want to. The first mile passed through open fields. Cotton plants grabbed at their ankles and the sun beat down mercilessly. Marcus maintained his lead, but Isaac's shortcut through the woods was starting to pay dividends. He emerged ahead of everyone except the young frontrunner. Then the terrain changed. They entered the forest where roots and fallen branches became obstacles. This was where strength and agility mattered more than pure speed. Thomas began to gain ground. His blacksmith's body, built for power, proved adept at vaulting over logs and pushing through undergrowth. He passed Samuel, then Daniel, then Solomon. Marcus heard heavy footsteps behind him and pushed harder, but his earlier pace had cost him. His breathing was ragged, his legs burning. When Thomas drew even with him, they made brief eye contact. For a moment, just a moment, they were not competitors, but fellow sufferers. 2 men being forced to race like animals for the amusement of their owner. Then Thomas pulled ahead. Marcus let him go, his spirit breaking before his body did. He slowed to a jog, tears of frustration streaming down his face. One by one, the others passed him. Isaac with his calculated route, Daniel with his steady endurance, even his father Solomon, running with paternal disappointment etched in every step. Only Benjamin remained behind Marcus, still maintaining that same unhurried pace. "Why aren't you running faster?" Marcus gasped when Benjamin drew even with him. "Because I'm not running to win," Benjamin answered. "I'm running to finish. There's a difference. She'll punish you for not trying. Maybe, but I'll still have myself at the end of it." Marcus stared at him, confused and angry and heartbroken all at once. Then he stopped running entirely, bent over with his hands on his knees, and vomited into the bushes. Benjamin kept going. The final mile was the hardest. They emerged from the woods into sight of the plantation house, and the crowd's cheering reached their ears. Thomas was in the lead by a significant margin, his powerful strides carrying him steadily forward. Isaac was 20 yards behind, having lost ground when his shortcut had led to a creek he'd had to wade through. Daniel and Solomon were neck and neck, both running on fumes and willpower. Samuel had fallen far behind, limping from a twisted ankle sustained on a hidden root. And Benjamin had stopped running entirely. He stood at the edge of the forest, watching the others race toward the oak tree, watching Celeste lean forward in her chair with excitement, watching the gathered slaves cheer and the white guests laugh and point. He thought about what she had said, about power being the only truth, about humanity being a luxury, and he thought about James, the stable hand who had loved a white woman and died for it, about Emily, who had hung herself from the very tree the others were racing toward. He thought about what it meant to win this race and what it meant to lose. Thomas reached the oak tree first, slapping his massive hand against the trunk with a crack that echoed across the grounds. The crowd erupted. Isaac finished second, 10 yards behind. Daniel and Solomon arrived nearly simultaneously, both too exhausted to care about third or fourth place. Samuel limped in minutes later, his face streaked with tears and dirt. And finally, long after the others had collapsed in the grass, Benjamin emerged from the forest. He walked the final 100 yards at a casual pace, ignoring the jeers from some of the white guests, ignoring Celeste's calculating gaze, ignoring everything except the simple act of putting one foot in front of the other. When he finally touched the oak tree, the overseer Garrett was waiting with a whip. "Lazy, disrespectful," Garrett began, raising the whip. "No." The single word from Celeste froze him in place. She descended from the veranda, her black dress sweeping the grass, her expression unreadable. "Benjamin ran," she said, her voice carrying across the suddenly silent crowd. "He finished. That was all I required. Lower the whip, Garrett." The overseer obeyed reluctantly, shooting Benjamin a look that promised future retribution. Celeste walked to where Thomas lay on the ground, his chest heaving, his body glistening with sweat. She looked down at him with something that might have been respect or might have been contempt. It was impossible to tell. "Congratulations, Thomas," she said. "You've won. Tonight you'll dine at my table and sleep in my guest room. You'll have a bath drawn, fresh clothes provided, and food that doesn't taste like ash and despair." She glanced at the other 6 men, some still on the ground, others standing with heads bowed. "The rest of you will spend tonight remembering what it feels like to lose, and wondering if you could have tried harder, run faster, been better." Her smile was like winter frost. "Same time next month, gentlemen. Perhaps next time. The competition will test something other than speed, perhaps loyalty or creativity, or willingness to betray." She returned to the veranda, leaving the 7 men to contemplate what they had become and what they had lost in the pursuit of 4 miles and a night of comfort. Benjamin met Thomas's eyes across the distance. The blacksmith looked away first, shame and triumph warring on his face. It had begun. Thomas stood in Celeste's guest room, barely recognizing himself in the full-length mirror. The bath had been hot, the soap perfumed, the towels soft. They had given him clothes that actually fit, trousers without patches, a shirt without holes, shoes that weren't falling apart. For the first time in his 38 years, he looked like a human being instead of property. The house slave who had attended to him, an elderly woman named Ruth, had said nothing during the entire process. Her face was carefully blank, but Thomas could read the judgment in her eyes. "You sold yourself for a bath and a meal." Maybe he had. There was a knock at the door and Ruth entered carrying a tray. The smell that wafted from it nearly brought Thomas to his knees. Roasted chicken, fresh bread, vegetables he couldn't even name, a glass of wine, real wine, not the rot gut sometimes distributed at Christmas. "Madam says to eat," Ruth said quietly. "She'll join you shortly." Thomas wanted to devour the food like an animal, but some shred of dignity made him sit at the small table by the window and use the actual cutlery provided. Each bite was a revelation. He had forgotten, or maybe never known, that food could taste like this. He was halfway through the meal when Celeste entered without knocking. She had changed from her day dress into something simpler, but no less elegant. Her blonde hair, usually severely pinned, hung loose around her shoulders. Without the harsh styling, she looked younger, almost vulnerable. Almost. "I trust the meal is satisfactory?" she asked, settling into the chair across from him. Thomas swallowed, nodded. "Yes, Mum. Thank you, Mum." "You don't need to thank me, Thomas. You won. This is your prize." She poured herself a glass of wine from the bottle on the table. "Tell me, how does it feel?" "How does what feel, Mum?" "Victory. How does it feel to have beaten your brothers?" "Your friends? Solomon's son?" Thomas set down his fork, appetite suddenly gone despite years of hunger. "It feels like betrayal." Celeste's eyebrows rose with interest. "Interesting. You won a fair competition, but you feel like a traitor. Why?" "Because there's nothing fair about it," Thomas said, the words coming before he could stop them. "You made us fight for things that should be basic human dignities. Food, rest, comfort. You turned us against each other for your entertainment." He expected anger, punishment, the end of his brief reprieve. Instead, Celeste laughed. "You're right, of course. There's nothing fair about it. Just like there's nothing fair about the fact that I was born white and wealthy while you were born black and enslaved. But fairness is a fiction, Thomas. The world runs on power, not justice." She leaned forward, her blue eyes intense in the lamplight. "Let me ask you something. If I offered you freedom right now, papers signed, your own land, everything, but the condition was that you had to whip Marcus until he bled, would you do it?" Thomas's hands clenched into fists on the table. "No." "Are you certain? Not even for freedom? For the chance to live as a man instead of property?" "I'm certain." Celeste studied him for a long moment, then sat back. "That's what makes you interesting, Thomas. You're not sure if you believe your own answer. I can see it in your eyes. Part of you wants to say yes. Part of you is wondering what Marcus's pain would be worth if it bought you everything you've ever dreamed of." She was right, and Thomas hated her for it. "That's the game I'm really playing," Celeste continued, swirling the wine in her glass. "Not the races or competitions. Those are just the surface. What I'm really testing is how much of your humanity you're willing to sell piece by piece for comfort, for recognition, for a glimpse of what life could be like if you weren't at the bottom of the world." "Why?" Thomas asked, his voice rough with emotion. "What do you gain from this?" Celeste's expression shifted, and for just a moment the mask slipped. Thomas saw something raw beneath: pain, loss, a wound that had never healed. "I'm proving a point," she said softly. "That love, loyalty, brotherhood, they're all just pretty words. When push comes to shove, when survival is on the line, everyone betrays everyone. No one is noble, no one is pure. We're all just animals scrambling in the mud." "Is that what your sister thought?" Thomas asked quietly. "Emily? Is that why she—" The slap came fast and hard, Celeste's palm connecting with his cheek with enough force to snap his head to the side. She stood, her chest heaving, rage and grief warring on her face. "Don't you dare speak her name," she hissed. "You know nothing about her, nothing about what love cost her, nothing about—" She stopped, regaining control with visible effort. When she spoke again, her voice was ice. "Your night of luxury is over, Thomas. You'll sleep here, in this comfortable bed, and in the morning you'll return to the quarters. You'll tell the others about the food, the bath, the clothes. You'll make them jealous, you'll plant the seeds of resentment, and next month, when the competition comes again, you'll all fight even harder, because now you know it's real." She walked to the door, paused with her hand on the handle. "Sleep well, Thomas. Dream of what it feels like to be human, because tomorrow you go back to being property." The door closed behind her with a soft click. Thomas sat alone in the lamplight, surrounded by luxury, filled with food, wearing clean clothes, and feeling more wretched than he had in years. The next month was exactly as Celeste had predicted. Thomas's description of his night in the main house, delivered reluctantly but inevitably, created a hunger in the others that had nothing to do with food. Marcus grew distant from his father, angry that Solomon had beaten him in the race. Isaac began hoarding information about the plantation's layout, looking for any advantage in future competitions. Daniel retreated into himself, his intelligence turning inward. Samuel's naive hope curdled into bitterness. Benjamin continued as before, steady and unchanging, which somehow made the others resent him most of all. Only Solomon seemed unaffected, though Esther knew better. She watched her husband stare at the ceiling of their cabin each night, wrestling with thoughts he wouldn't voice. Celeste announced the second competition on a Tuesday. This time, it wouldn't be a test of physical prowess, but something more insidious. "Information," she declared from her veranda. The 7 men once again assembled before her. "I've hidden 7 pieces of paper throughout the plantation. Each contains a secret about someone in this community. Slave or free, I won't say which. The first person to bring me the most valuable secret wins." She smiled at their confusion. "The value is subjective, gentlemen. A secret about where someone hid extra food might be useful. A secret about who's been teaching others to read might be more so. A secret about other matters might be invaluable. You have until Sunday evening to collect your information." "What counts as a secret?" Daniel asked, his analytical mind already working through the implications. "Anything that someone wants hidden, anything that reveals truth someone wishes to keep buried. Use your judgment." "And if we don't participate?" Benjamin asked. Celeste's expression hardened. "Then you'll spend a week in the hotbox. Would you like to test whether I'm serious?" The hotbox was a metal container, barely large enough for a man to crouch in, placed in the full sun. 3 hours inside could break someone. A week would drive them mad or kill them. Benjamin said nothing more. "Excellent, you're dismissed. Happy hunting." As the men dispersed, the real horror of the competition began to sink in. They weren't being asked to compete against each other this time. They were being asked to betray their entire community. That night, in Solomon's cabin, the discussion was heated. "We can't do this," Marcus said, pacing in the small space. "If we start revealing each other's secrets, we destroy any trust we have left. We become her spies." "We don't have a choice," Isaac countered. "You heard her. The hotbox or compliance. Those are our options." "There's always a choice," Benjamin said quietly from his corner. "Easy for you to say," Thomas rumbled. "You're willing to suffer for your principles. Not everyone is." "I'm not asking anyone to suffer," Benjamin replied. "I'm asking us to be creative. She said we need to bring her secrets. She didn't say they had to be true." The room fell silent as they processed this. "You mean make something up?" Daniel asked slowly. "I mean give her what she wants without actually betraying anyone. We each discover a secret that seems valuable but is actually useless. Something that can't be verified or disproven. Something that satisfies her requirement without destroying our community." Solomon nodded slowly. "It could work. But we'd need to coordinate. If our stories contradict each other, she'll know we're lying." "Then we meet tomorrow night," Benjamin said. "We create our secrets together. We make them believable enough to satisfy her, but harmless enough to protect everyone." "And what if one of us decides to actually betray someone?" Samuel asked, his voice bitter. "What if one of us decides that winning is more important than loyalty?" The question hung in the air unanswerable, because they all knew it was possible. Celeste had shown them that nothing was certain, that the bonds they thought were unbreakable could fray under the right pressure. "Then we deal with that when it happens," Solomon said finally. "But right now, we make a pact. We protect each other. We protect our community. And we remember that she's the enemy, not us." They clasped hands in the dim light. 7 men making a promise they hoped they could keep. But Celeste, watching from her window with a spyglass she had positioned for exactly this purpose, smiled. She couldn't hear their words, but she could read their body language, their camaraderie, their unity. Perfect. Unity made the eventual betrayal so much sweeter. The plan fell apart on Friday. Thomas came to Benjamin that evening, his face stricken with guilt and fear. They met behind the barn, away from prying eyes. "I can't do it," Thomas said without preamble. "I can't give her a false secret." "Why not?" Benjamin asked, though he could see the answer in the blacksmith's eyes. "Because she came to me yesterday. She told me that if I gave her a real secret, something that mattered, she'd give me papers." Benjamin's blood ran cold. "Papers? Freedom papers. For me and my wife. She said we could leave Louisiana, start over somewhere else, be free." The word hung between them like a prayer and a curse. "And what does she want for this miraculous gift?" Benjamin asked, though he already knew. "She wants to know who's been teaching slaves to read. She knows someone is doing it. She just doesn't know who." It was Daniel. Everyone knew it was Daniel, though no one spoke of it openly. He held lessons late at night for anyone willing to risk learning. 5 people could now read basic words. 3 could write their names. Teaching slaves to read was illegal in Louisiana, punishable by whipping, branding, or sale. "You're going to give her Daniel," Benjamin said flatly. "I don't want to. God knows I don't want to, but Benjamin, freedom, for me and my wife. After 40 years of this hell, the chance to live as a human being before I die." Thomas's voice broke. "What would you do? Honestly, if she offered you freedom for one name, what would you do?" Benjamin looked up at the stars, the same stars that had guided escaped slaves north on the Underground Railroad, the same stars that shone on free states where black men could own property, vote, live without fear. "I don't know," he admitted finally. "I want to believe I'd refuse. But I've never been tested like this, none of us have." "She knows," Thomas said bitterly. "She knows exactly what she's doing. She's not just testing us anymore, she's destroying us, piece by piece." "Then don't let her." "How? How do I choose between my freedom and Daniel's life?" Benjamin grabbed Thomas's shoulders, forcing the larger man to meet his eyes. "You choose to tell Daniel. You warn him. You give him the chance to hide, to stop teaching, to protect himself. Then you go to Celeste and tell her the teacher has stopped and you don't know who it was. She'll know I'm lying. Maybe. But at least you'll still be able to look at yourself. At least you won't have traded your soul for papers." Thomas pulled away, his face anguished. "You don't understand. You're young. You haven't lived as long under this as I have. You don't know what it's like to watch hope die year after year after year. This might be my only chance." "Then take it," Benjamin said quietly. "Betray Daniel. Win your freedom. Live with the knowledge that you bought it with another man's blood. But don't ask me to tell you it's the right choice. Don't ask me to absolve you." Thomas stood there for a long moment, then turned and walked away into the darkness. Benjamin didn't follow. He had his own decision to make. Sunday evening arrived with the weight of Judgment Day. The 7 men gathered once more before Celeste's veranda, each holding a piece of paper. The secrets they had gathered or invented would determine the next winner. But the atmosphere was different now. The solidarity of the previous week had evaporated. They stood apart from each other, suspicious, wary. Celeste had planted seeds of doubt, and they had taken root with terrible efficiency. "Gentlemen," Celeste said, rising from her chair like a judge preparing to deliver sentences, "let's see what you've discovered. Marcus, you first." Marcus stepped forward, unfolding his paper with shaking hands. "The overseer Garrett has been skimming supplies from the plantation stores. He sells them in town and keeps the money." Celeste's expression didn't change. "Interesting. Verifiable if true. Though it doesn't help me much since Garrett is already on notice for other matters." She made a note in a small ledger she kept. "Next. Isaac." Isaac's secret was about a neighboring plantation owner's affair with a house slave. Celeste smiled at this one. Gossip among the white elite was always valuable currency. Daniel presented a fabricated story about hidden tools near the northern boundary. Samuel claimed to know about planned resistance among field workers, though the details were vague enough to be useless. Solomon's secret was about suspicious activity among the livestock, another misdirection, carefully crafted to seem important while revealing nothing. Benjamin stepped forward last, his face calm despite the storm he knew was coming. "I have no secret to offer," he said clearly. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the evening birds seemed to pause their songs. Celeste leaned forward, her eyes glittering with interest. "No secret, even though you know the consequence?" "I know the consequence. I choose it anyway." "Why?" "Because I won't be your instrument. I won't help you tear apart what little community we have left. You can put me in the hot box, you can whip me, you can sell me south, but you can't make me betray my people." For a moment, something flickered across Celeste's face, respect perhaps, or frustration that her carefully laid plans had hit an unexpected obstacle. Then Thomas stepped forward. "I have a secret," he said, his voice hollow. "A real one." Benjamin's heart sank. He met Thomas's eyes and saw the apology there, the shame, the desperate hope that couldn't be denied. "There's someone teaching slaves to read," Thomas continued, each word seeming to cost him. "Late at night in one of the storage buildings. I don't know who the teacher is, but I know it's happening." Celeste's smile was triumphant. "Now that is interesting. That is illegal. That is valuable." She looked at the other men. "Does anyone else have information about this reading teacher?" The silence was its own answer. They all knew. They had all protected Daniel, and now Thomas had broken ranks. "Thomas," Celeste purred, "you've won this round. Not just a night in the main house, but something far better. Come to my office tomorrow morning. We have paperwork to discuss." The meaning was clear. Thomas had won his freedom. Daniel stood very still, his face carefully neutral, but his hands were trembling. He had known this moment might come from the instant Celeste announced the competition. He had known someone might break. He just hadn't expected it to be Thomas. "You're all dismissed," Celeste said. "Except you, Benjamin. We have a hot box to prepare." As the others filed away, Thomas tried to catch Benjamin's eye, but Benjamin refused to look at him. Solomon put a hand on his son Marcus's shoulder, steering him away before the young man could say something that would get him in trouble. Only Daniel paused, turning back to look at Thomas. Their eyes met across the distance, and Daniel said one word. "Why?" Thomas had no answer that wouldn't sound like the excuse it was. Benjamin stood alone before Celeste, waiting for his punishment. But she was looking at him with that same calculating expression she had worn the day she announced the competitions. "You could have saved yourself," she observed. "You could have given me any secret, even a false one. Instead, you chose martyrdom. I chose integrity. Same thing from my perspective." She descended the steps, circling him like a predator. "But here's what fascinates me. Benjamin, you're willing to suffer for your principles. That's admirable in its way. But what about when it's not just you suffering? What about when your choices hurt others?" "I don't understand. The hot box, as punishment for your defiance, will be 3 days. But I'm going to add a twist. Each day you spend in there, I'll reduce the rations for everyone in the quarters by half. Your suffering becomes their suffering. Your principles become their hunger." Benjamin's jaw clenched. "That's not a punishment. That's coercion. It's reality. Every choice has consequences that ripple outward. You can't be noble in a vacuum." She smiled. "So here's your real choice, Benjamin. Spend 3 days in the hot box and let your people starve, or give me a secret. Any secret. True or false. And spare them." It was brilliant in its cruelty. She had turned his integrity into a weapon against him. Benjamin closed his eyes, thinking of the children who would go hungrier, thinking of the elderly who already barely had enough to eat, thinking of how his stand for principle would cause suffering for people who had no choice in the matter. "There's a loose board in the chapel," he said finally, the words tasting like ash. "People hide things there, personal items, small treasures, things they don't want found during searches." It was true, and it was harmless, and it was still a betrayal of the privacy and dignity of his community. Celeste's smile widened. "See? Everyone breaks eventually. It's just a matter of finding the right pressure point." She waved her hand dismissively. "You're free to go. No hot box, no reduced rations, just the knowledge that you compromised your precious integrity when it mattered." Benjamin walked back to the quarters feeling more defeated than if she had actually punished him, because she was right. He had broken, maybe not as badly as Thomas, but he had still bent. Behind him, Celeste watched from her veranda, satisfaction warming her like wine. The game was progressing beautifully. The weeks that followed Thomas's betrayal created rifts that couldn't be mended. Daniel stopped teaching, went silent and withdrawn. The 5 who had been learning to read lost their chance at literacy. The 3 who could write their names would have to be satisfied with that meager knowledge forever. Thomas and his wife received their papers on a grey Tuesday morning. They left the plantation with a small bundle of possessions, walking toward a freedom purchased with betrayal. No one came to say goodbye. The 3rd competition was announced for the following month, but the nature of it had changed. It was no longer just about winning. It was about survival in a community that was eating itself from within. Celeste watched it all with the satisfaction of an artist seeing her vision come to life. The 7 men, now 6 with Thomas gone, were shadows of what they had been. The trust was gone. The brotherhood was gone. They looked at each other with suspicion, wondering who would break next, what price would finally be too high. But she had underestimated one thing. Benjamin had been quiet since his own moment of compromise, but quiet didn't mean inactive. He had been watching, thinking, planning, and he had realized something crucial. Celeste's power came from their willingness to play her game. Every time they competed, every time they participated, they gave her what she wanted. So he decided to change the game. The 3rd competition was another race, but this time with obstacles. Celeste had set up a course through the plantation with various challenges, climbing, swimming, solving simple puzzles. The winner would receive, as always, a night of luxury. When the starting pistol fired, 5 men ran forward with varying degrees of enthusiasm. Benjamin stayed at the starting line. "Move!" Garrett the overseer shouted, raising his whip. "No," Benjamin said calmly. The whip came down across his back, tearing through his shirt and drawing blood. Benjamin gasped but didn't move. "I said move!" "No." Another strike, then another. By the 5th lash, Celeste had arrived, pushing through the crowd. "Stop!" she commanded. Garrett lowered the whip, breathing hard. Celeste looked at Benjamin with fury and something else, a grudging respect for his defiance. "You're refusing to participate." "I'm refusing to let you destroy us anymore," Benjamin said through gritted teeth, blood running down his back. "You can whip me, you can kill me, but I won't run. I won't compete. I won't play your games. Then you'll go to the hotbox for a week. So be it." Marcus, who had been running the course, stopped mid-stride. He turned back, looking at Benjamin standing there, bloodied but unbowed. He thought about his father's words from months ago. "Remember that you're more than this." Marcus walked back to the starting line and stood next to Benjamin. "I'm not running either," he said. Celeste's eyes narrowed. This was not part of the plan. Daniel, who had been solving one of the puzzles, abandoned it and walked back. Then Solomon. Then Isaac. Finally Samuel, confused but following the others. All 6 men stood in a line at the starting point, refusing to continue. The crowd of slaves watching had fallen completely silent. This was something new, something dangerous, something that could get them all killed. But it was also something powerful. "You're all refusing?" Celeste asked, her voice dangerously soft. "We're all refusing," Solomon confirmed. "Then you'll all be punished severely. I'll make examples of each of you." "Maybe," Benjamin said, "but you'll have to explain to your peers why you had to brutally punish 6 of your most valuable workers. You'll have to explain the loss of productivity, the loss of property value, the loss of your own reputation." He met her eyes steadily, despite the pain radiating from his back. "You have power over us, Madame Beaumont, but power has limits. We may be slaves, but we're also human beings. And human beings can choose how much of themselves they're willing to give, even when everything is taken from them." For a long moment, no one moved. The entire plantation seemed to hold its breath. Then Celeste did something unexpected. She laughed, not her usual cruel laugh, but something that sounded almost genuine. "Well played, Benjamin. Well played indeed." She looked at the 6 men, then at the assembled crowd. "The competition is cancelled. Everyone back to work." As the crowd dispersed, confused but relieved, Celeste approached Benjamin one last time. "You've won this round," she said quietly, so only he could hear. "But don't mistake a single victory for winning the war. I still own you, I still own all of you. One act of defiance doesn't change that fundamental reality. Maybe not, Benjamin replied, but it changes us, and that's enough. The competitions ended after that day, but the damage they had caused lingered like a wound that wouldn't heal. Thomas's absence was a constant reminder of the cost of survival. The trust that had been broken couldn't be easily repaired, but something else had changed too. The 6 men who had stood together in defiance carried themselves differently now. They had found a boundary they wouldn't cross, a line they wouldn't let Celeste push them over. It wasn't freedom. They were still slaves, still property, still subject to the brutal realities of plantation life. But it was something. Celeste, for her part, retreated into her mansion. She still watched from her veranda, still controlled every aspect of plantation life, but the gleeful cruelty that had animated her experiments was gone. She had proven her point about human nature. People would betray each other under the right pressure, but she had also discovered something she hadn't expected. Some people would choose solidarity over self-interest, even when it cost them everything. 2 months after the cancelled competition, Benjamin was summoned to the main house. He expected punishment for his defiance, some delayed retribution for embarrassing her in front of her peers. Instead, he found Celeste in her library, staring out the window at the oak tree where her sister had died all those years ago. "Do you know why I really started the competitions?" she asked without preamble. Benjamin remained silent, waiting. "I wanted to prove that love was a lie, that loyalty was just a pretty word, that when pushed hard enough, everyone becomes a monster." She turned to face him, and for the first time he saw her without her armor. Just a woman, scarred and broken in ways that power couldn't fix. "My sister loved that stable hand, really loved him. She would have given up everything for him, her family, her wealth, her position, and I couldn't understand it. How could she love someone so much that she would throw away everything?" "Because love isn't a transaction," Benjamin said quietly. "It's not about what you get. It's about connection, about seeing another person's humanity and honoring it." Celeste's laugh was bitter. "My father sold her humanity for $1,000. That's what James cost. $1,000 and a one-way trip to a sugar mill. Emily hung herself 3 weeks later. She was 20 years old and love killed her." "Losing love killed her," Benjamin corrected. "That's different." "Is it?" Celeste met his eyes. "I wanted to prove that love was just survival instinct dressed up in pretty language, that given the right circumstances, everyone betrays everyone. Thomas proved me right. He sold his friend for freedom." "And 5 others refused," Benjamin countered. 5 people chose solidarity over self-interest. 5 people proved that love and loyalty are real, even under impossible circumstances. "You think that's a victory?" "I think it's human, which means it's complicated. Thomas was wrong to betray Daniel, but I understand why he did it. He's not a monster. He's a man who was put in an impossible situation. We're all just trying to survive in a world designed to break us." Celeste turned back to the window, silent for a long moment. "I'm selling the plantation," she said finally. Benjamin's heart stopped. Being sold could mean anything: a better situation, a worse one, separation from everyone he knew, death in the deep south sugar or rice fields. The new owner arrives in 2 weeks. He's from Boston, one of those abolitionist types who thinks he can run a plantation without brutality. He'll probably fail, but that's his problem now. "What about the people here?" Benjamin asked. "What happens to us?" "That's between you and him. I've stipulated that families must be kept together, but beyond that..." She shrugged. "I'm done playing God with other people's lives." "What will you do? Leave Louisiana, maybe go to Europe, somewhere far away from Spanish moss and oak trees, and memories of sisters who died for love." She looked at him one last time. "You won, Benjamin. You and your stubborn refusal to let me destroy your humanity. I hope it serves you better than my sister's humanity served her." She walked past him toward the door, then paused. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry. Not for what I did. I'd probably do it again if I thought it would prove my point. But I'm sorry that the world is the way it is. That power and powerlessness exist. That people like you have to be strong in ways people like me will never understand." Then she was gone, leaving Benjamin alone in the library, surrounded by books he had never been allowed to read. in a house that represented everything he had been denied, in a life that was never truly his own. But he was still standing, still human, still whole, despite everything. And sometimes that was enough. 5 years later, Benjamin stood beneath the oak tree where Emily Beaumont had hung herself, where he and the others had raced for Celeste's amusement, where so much pain had been witnessed and endured. The Emancipation Proclamation had come and gone. The war was over. Louisiana was in chaos, Reconstruction just beginning, the old order shattered but the new one not yet built. Benjamin was a free man now, though freedom was more complicated than he had imagined during his years of bondage. He had stayed on the plantation, now called Beaumont Farm, working for wages under the new owner, an earnest man from Massachusetts who meant well but understood little. Marcus was there too, and Daniel and Solomon, who had lived just long enough to see freedom before dying peacefully in his sleep. Isaac and Samuel had gone north, looking for opportunities in cities that might be marginally less hostile to black men. Thomas had never been seen again after leaving the plantation that day. Rumor said he had made it to Mexico or California, or had died of cholera somewhere in Texas. Benjamin hoped he had found peace, whatever that meant for a man who had bought freedom with betrayal. The oak tree still stood, its branches spreading wide, its roots deep. The Spanish moss still swayed in the breeze, but the weight of history hung heavy on it, visible to anyone who knew to look. Benjamin placed his hand on the rough bark, thinking about Celeste, wherever she was now, thinking about her sister Emily, who had loved too much in a world that punished love, thinking about the competitions, the compromises, the moments when humanity was tested and sometimes found wanting. "Mr. Benjamin," a voice called from behind him. A young child, one of the newly freed families, looked at him with wide eyes. "My mama says you used to be a slave here. Is that true?" "Yes," Benjamin said simply. "What was it like?" Benjamin looked at the child, trying to find words for something that couldn't really be explained. How do you describe what it's like to be property, to have every choice taken from you, to find humanity in the smallest acts of resistance? "It was hard," he said finally, "but we survived. And survival, when everything is trying to break you, is its own kind of victory." The child nodded, not really understanding but sensing the weight of the words. Then they ran off to play, young enough that slavery was already becoming history rather than memory. Benjamin stayed by the tree a while longer, watching the sun set over land that had seen so much suffering, so much cruelty, so much resilience. The plantation that Celeste Beaumont had used as her laboratory for testing human nature was now something else, not quite free, not quite equal, but transformed. And Benjamin carried within him the lessons of those terrible months. That power could be resisted, even when resistance seemed impossible. That solidarity was more valuable than comfort. That humanity could be preserved even in the most inhuman circumstances. As darkness fell, he walked back toward the small house he now rented, toward a life that was his own, complicated, uncertain, but free. Behind him, the oak tree stood sentinel, holding its secrets, bearing witness to all that had been and all that was yet to come. The widow's games had ended. But the work of remaining human, of building community, of resisting the forces that sought to break people into pieces, that work continued, day after day, in small acts of dignity and defiance. And sometimes, on quiet evenings, Benjamin could still hear the echo of 7 men standing together at a starting line, refusing to run, choosing each other over prizes, choosing humanity over survival. It wasn't the freedom Emily Beaumont had died for. It wasn't the vindication Celeste had sought, but it was real, and it was theirs, and it was enough. The story of Celeste Beaumont and the men she tried to break is a reminder of the darkest chapters of American history, but also of the resilience that allowed people to survive those chapters with their humanity intact. The competitions she created were cruel experiments designed to prove that all human connections were fundamentally selfish. But in the end, she was proven wrong. Not because everyone resisted, Thomas's betrayal was real and understandable, but because enough people found ways to remain human, despite impossible circumstances. History is full of stories like this, Stories of power wielded cruelly, of people reduced to property, of systems designed to break the spirit. But it's also full of stories of resistance, solidarity, and the stubborn refusal to let cruelty have the final word. The oak tree still stands somewhere in Louisiana, if you know where to look. The plantation is long gone, transformed or destroyed by time, but the lessons remain, that humanity can be found in the darkest places, that solidarity can resist even the most brutal power, and that sometimes the simple act of standing together is the most revolutionary thing of all. If this story moved you, challenged you, or made you think about history in new ways, please like this video, share it with others who need to hear these stories, and subscribe to our channel for more deep dives into the uncomfortable truths of our past. These stories matter. They remind us of where we've been, what we've survived, and why we must never return to those dark places. They honor the resilience of those who came before us and challenge us to be better than the worst parts of our history. Thank you for watching, for listening, and for remembering. Until next time, stay curious, stay compassionate, and never forget that our shared humanity is worth fighting for.